everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. So before we start off, we just wanted to let you know that we've been obviously sending you emails about this, but if you haven't seen them, we are now putting out one video each week, every Thursday on our YouTube channel. So these are going to be recorded sessions of any of the previous sessions we've had. And I know this is something all of you have been asking for a long time. And we finally have been able to do this. So if there's any session you missed or you want to go back and watch some session, you can go and try and find it on our YouTube channel. And we'll keep adding videos to this each week. Okay, so I hope you enjoy watching them and I hope they help you. And as always, all our content is available on our website. So you can download all the slides from our session as well. And if you have any questions, anytime you're watching a video, you don't understand anything, please do email us and we will respond.
So we'll begin. So mostly I'll be talking about how do we use science in forest conservation and wildlife conservation. I mean, we all love seeing forest, we all love wildlife, and there's a lot of science behind it. And my job here is to convince these young minds that why we should be so vehement in supporting forest conservation or making a small contribution to it. And all I link it with science, and I've tried to make it very, very simple because my agenda is to give you a feel, because as you grow up, the details will catch up with you. So here it's all about a feel and exposure in this direction, that what really the science behind it and why we should be so concerned about it. So let me begin this. On the right, I would like to say this is Little Run of Kutch, which is the only place in India where you see the wild ass. It's a beautiful place if you ever want to visit. So just rough my background. I am an officer in the Indian Forest Service, and it's a specialized service by Government of India, and it deals with these topics: forest conservation, wildlife management, environment protection, mostly taking care of pollution and all. Climate change, I'm sure many of you have heard this term these days. Ecotourism. Ecotourism is something where you are doing tourism activity, but you are also nature friendly. Like mostly the way you go to safaris in national parks, that's where we follow this principle. And tribal development, because there are a lot of people that stay in forest and are dependent on forests. So even their development becomes a priority. So all I'm trying to tell you is there's a specialized service for it, which means how much importance it has been given in our constitution and in the polity we follow. So yes, before we move on, I would like to talk about certain concepts which are very important to whatever the topics I'll be discussing and whatever in general this whole thing is about. So first, let me talk about ecosystem. I'll be very, very simple. What is an ecosystem? It's an area which has what? It has living beings, it has non-living things, and how they both interact. So this is a photograph of Pench Tiger Reserve, and through this photo, I like to explain you what is an ecosystem. So this is grass growing. It's a living component, also called biotic. You have trees in the background. Again, trees are living. Again, biotic. You have this. There's a herd of spotted deer. I'll zoom in the next slide. So this is a very well hidden here. There's around 10 to 15 deer standing here. They are also biotic. They're animal living being. Now you can see sunlight. That's abiotic, non-living factor. And then you have water, again non-living. So what is ecosystem? This area where you have living being, non-living, and then interaction. What do I mean by interaction? Like when you feel like you are a living being, right? So when you feel thirsty, you drink water. Water is a non-living thing, so you interact. Similarly, the sunlight will fall on this tree, on the grass will grow. That is an interaction. Soon this deer will start feeling thirsty. They'll come here and they start having water. So this whole thing, this interaction, this living non-living is what is called ecosystem in the most simplest way possible. Second, let's go to food chain. I'm sure many of you must have heard about that, this very famous diagram that deer, they feed upon grass, and then you have the tiger that feed upon the deer. I wanted here to show you real picture that how it actually looks in the nature, because this is a very common textbook diagram, but I want to show this is the same picture from the previous slide where I've zoomed in on the herd of deer. So they are very curious because I was clicking the picture. And if you see this black mark, this guy is still busy eating grass. So this is the first interaction. The deer is feeding on the grass. And now the second picture, if you see, you have a tiger, and the tiger is holding a deer in its hand. So that is the second interaction. A tiger is about to attack a deer. So this is how a food chain is like a sequential event. Is who eats whom, and they all survive based on that. A deer will go and eat grass, and a tiger will finally come and attack the deer and eat it. That's how the nature works. So I just wanted to give you a real feel of it, how it actually looks. Now this is very simplistic. In actual nature, now it's not like that only deer will eat the grass. You can also have a rabbit that can come and eat the same grass, right? Similarly, there can be an owl which can come and attack the rabbit. So it's not a very one direction thing. Actual nature. In actual nature, it's a food web. It's like a lot of food chains. They are interconnected. Like here you can see this grass can be eaten by grasshopper, can be also eaten by rabbit, and there's a lot of connections to it. This is how it's in the real nature in forest. So this is how it happens. Now all this what I've shown you is are theoretical concepts. They you will, as I've shown you here the live example, they are do you do see them in the nature, but there are also a lot of uh, reasons, a lot of factors that often you won't see this, and that's where we come into picture. Our role as the Indian Forest Service officer is to make sure is that the balance of the nature is these concepts you actually see in a forest, because that's how you conserve everything in this entirety. We want to conserve the whole nature, not only one thing out of it. So coming now to this thing that because you all are young minds and you will be running the show eventually, I want this, my job here is to feed into your mind why scientifically we should be worried about forest conservation. Why?
Agreem, before you tell them the reason, maybe we'll ask them what their opinion is. Why
Sure,
do
sure,
they
sure.
think we should
Sure,
conserve
sure.
forests?
Please.
Okay, so does anybody want to type in why do you think we should conserve forests? Why are they important? Why should scientists and why should everybody care about forests? Okay, what are some reasons that, okay, so Bhumi says because we need oxygen, fresh air. What else? Ishwar says because trees give us oxygen. Trees help maintain balance in the oxygen and carbon levels. Kavish says we get a lot of things from forests like plants, herbs, honey.
Exactly.
Yes, oxygen. Okay. Great.
Very valid point. And exactly this is what I'll be coming to. But I also have to add one more thing, which is water. Oxygen is like we all know about it. But now my job here is to convince you that how the water you drink, like we all use water for our daily needs. We play Holi using water. A lot of things we do. So when we live in cities, we have this concept that okay, it's coming from some municipal tap or maybe some borewell. But here my job is to convince you, and this will really help all of us, that most of the water, fresh water that we are consuming, ultimately has its origin in the forest. Or in another word, if there are no forest, we won't have a supply of water in all the cities. And this is I am showing through example. So first is on the left, this is again Pench Tiger Reserve, and on the right, the hill is in Madhya Pradesh. On left, you have Maharashtra, and this is the Pench River. It forms the border between the states of Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, and this river ultimately comes out of the forest, and it's your Nagpur, the city of Nagpur, depends the water supplied by this river, and this river flows to the forest. You see on all the sides there's greenery, and now I now link it to how this greenery is linked to the water we get. Come on the right side. We all know about Mumbai, how big city it is, and we also know about Sanjay Gandhi National Park, which is in the center of Mumbai. In the center of Sanjay Gandhi National Park, we have Tulsi Lake, and Tulsi Lake, the water supply of Mumbai goes from this lake. And again, you see this lake is again surrounded on all sides by forest. So the point I'm trying to make here is, I'll show this in the next slide. Yes. So this is how a typical forest looks like in India. This is from my current place where I'm posted right now, the forest nearby. So this is central India. This is how the forest looks like. Now tell me one thing. Suppose you have a plain land or you have a plain cement road, and if you throw water on it, what will happen? Anybody would like to answer?
I'm sure everybody sees this every day in their life. So what happens to the water? Kavish says it evaporates.
Yes, it evaporates, or it flows very fast. It will just flow. It will just vanish. Why? Because there is no time for the water to go inside the land, right? Now, this is where the forest comes into play. Now, if you see on the left, what you see is this is the typical structure of a forest. You have big trees, you have old trees, You have young trees. You have this at the back. You see this young trees. You have rocks. You have grasses. You have everything. Now imagine if rainfall happens over here. What will happen? Some rain will get stuck in the leaves. Some rain will get stuck on the stem. Some drops will fall in this gaps you have between a rock. In nutshell, what will be happening? The rain will stay here for some time. It will just not uh, get washed away. And why that is needed? Because the more the rain, the more the water spends time in the land, the more the chance it will go inside the land. On the right, you can see this aquifer. Is that photo visible? So you have aquifer. Again, let's forget any technical jargon. I'm just telling you one thing. You have greenery above, waterfalls. Through the soil, it goes inside, and this water is stored inside. We all know that we have water underground. And the same water eventually comes out in the form of lake, in the form of rivers. So that is where, so this now again to explain you in just one simple word. Have you seen this famous cartoon SpongeBob SquarePants? This is the main character there. It's a sponge. What does a sponge does? It soaks a lot of water and it releases it very slowly. So just remember this, in real life, your forest is like a sponge. It takes away all the rainfall. It allows the rainfall. It gives the rainfall enough time to go inside the land, and this water is stored inside. And that's how it makes sure that the water just simply doesn't run away with all the soil. It doesn't cause flood. It doesn't just go to the sea directly, because it is this water that is stored inside the land we eventually use. It eventually forms a river. It eventually forms lake, and this water comes ultimately to our cities. So always remember, the biggest reason in the 21st century we should conserve forest, because it's the source of our water supply. And we all know that how water is becoming more scarce and scarce as we go on. So yes, you are all very, very right about it. It gives us oxygen, but it also gives us water. So next time anybody asks you, you have to type two things: water and oxygen. Okay, so we'll move ahead. Now, again, this I'll talk about certain. Now, most of us live in cities. We have like Mumbai, Pune, Thane. What do you see there? There's a lot of construction, right? A lot of cement roads. We have a lot of roads, a lot of footpath. What is happening? When you construct a lot of things, again, those areas, they cannot absorb water, because cement, if water falls on the cement pathway on a pavement, it will just flow. It won't go inside the land. So which means we have less and less space to absorb water, to make sure that the water reaches below the ground, as shown in this picture. So how do you compensate for it? Now, if you see this, lot of cities in India like Nagpur, Mumbai, Pune, Thane, Nashik, all these cities are surrounded by forest. That's the good part. So in this forest, what we do, we create this type of structures. This is a trench. This is one trench. This is a behind trench and all. And this is, if you see on the, I'm talking about the left side photo. It is a slope. So now when the rain is falling here, it goes in the trench. So there's again more chance that it will again go inside the land, because somewhere we have lost the space, right? In cities, we have lost the space to absorb water. So we have to compensate for it in the forest area, so that we have the roughly same amount of water. We have that balance is roughly restored or is maintained. So that's why in forest area, we do make such structures. On the right is something called perlocation pond. Very simple. You just make a pond. You wait for the rainfall. Rain will fall. In the first season, the entire water that will fall in the pond will go in the soil. You won't see any water on the ground. In the second season, in the third year, the lake will start filling. And it has been seen that all the nearby area, wherever you make such ponds, the wells there or the lakes, they automatically get regenerated. So we do such activities in forest because ultimately this water ultimately is reaching your cities, you're reaching your towns, is helping our industries, helping our livelihood and all. So we make this structure, or we do such type of scientific intervention inside forest, so that roughly the balance is restored.
So Agrim, there's
Yes.
one question before we move ahead.
Sure.
How long does it take from when you make such an intervention to actually seeing some effects?
So this right thing I'll tell you, perlocation pond, when you suppose, generally we do it just before monsoon. It just requires some 10-15 laborers, and they get, it's also a way of generating employment. So you make this pond. Now rainfall will happen. In the first rainfall, suppose 3 months rain is falling. entire water will be soaked because it's like some of the ground is thirsty for water. So even after 3 months of rain, you won't see a single drop of water in this pond. It will be empty because that entire water will flow down. It will go in the land. So first season is gone. Now second year is where the magic happens. Second year, when again the rainfall will come, you will see two things. Now this pond is starting to fill because now the land is kind of saturated. And now by the third year, what you'll see that suppose this is again on a slope, the downstream area, suppose you have a village downstream, and that village had a well which there was no water before. You start seeing water coming there. Somehow this water, which we did make the structure, has traveled there to the gravity. So it has a very beautiful effect. And if you go 4 or 5 years down the lane, you start seeing vegetation coming because now there's more water, so more grasses, more trees can grow. And again, seeing the concept of food chain, as you have more grasses, you'll start seeing animals coming there. So area where there was no wildlife, now you have wildlife. So
Yes.
yes.
I think that is what Kavish's question was. He was also, I think he said, is this like an animal water hole?
Exactly. Very good connection of dot. This is also another purpose of it. What we have observed, so what we do, we put cameras over here. We have camera traps. We'll put them on the one tree and then we record. So what we see that during summers, when there's less water in the forest, you'll see a lot of animals coming here to drink water. So it also serves that purpose. Very well, very good, very well pointed out. So we'll move ahead.
Yes, definitely.
Now, I hope all of us are convinced that our water comes from the forest. Now, second scientific reason why we should conserve forest. I'm sure many of us, many of our audience have observed that now that summers are becoming hotter year by year, and now it's so difficult to play in the afternoon. There are heat waves and all. So, what is the reason? This again, the terminology for it is global warming, but again, let's keep it very simple. Basically, what is happening? Our Earth is becoming hotter day by day. Why? Because of this one gas called carbon dioxide. Now, there are other gases also, but we'll focus on this one. Now, I'm sure we all know that we inhale oxygen and we exhale CO2. Now, this CO2 gas, carbon dioxide, has a property by which it is an excellent, it traps heat. So naturally, if you have more and more CO2 in the environment, it is trapping more and more heat. It is raising the temperature. So these days, our human activities are such that whatever we are doing, from using our bikes, using our cars, using AC, anything, it has caused release of more and more CO2 in the environment. As a result, the atmosphere is heating up. Now, in this context, again, forest comes as a savior. Now, I'll try to explain in the next slide how. Again, this is a typical forest. So now you all must be knowing that what the leaves prepare food for the trees, right? They do the process called photosynthesis where they take CO2 and they release oxygen. As a lot of my young minds, they pointed out that trees give us oxygen. So how they give that? They take CO2, they take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, they make food out of it, which they consume, and that food they use to grow. And then they, as a byproduct, they release oxygen, which we inhale. Correct? So now when you apply this simple principle in the forest, what is happening? Trees easily live for more than 100 years. And even then also they don't die directly. They slowly start decaying and then they die. So trees in their 100 years of life, they are taking so much of CO2 because they're making food every day, right? So when they're taking CO2, they're taking the CO2 outside the environment, which means CO2 is reducing in the atmosphere. And just now we discussed that CO2 is linked to the heating of the environment. So if you extract CO2 outside the atmosphere, the temperature are supposed to be maintained or reduced. And that's one big role of forests are playing. They are trapping the CO2, which if left in the environment will create heat, will increase the temperature. So if you see this entire photo, so trees, they are made up of carbon. Everything, trees, the leaves, the twigs, the branches, the roots inside, they are made up of carbon. So if the carbon is stuck here, you have kind of trapped the carbon, right? You have said that, oh, you won't go in the environment, I want to keep you with me, in the simplest term possible. So this carbon it's all stored here, which means this carbon is not available in the atmosphere to become CO2 and absorb heat and make our life tougher, right? So that is kind of the biggest, another big role forests are playing. So carbon is stored in the trees for years because trees are growing for years. They'll take care of this carbon for years. Again, leaves are constantly making food, so they are taking CO2 from the environment every day. And thirdly, there's a lot of these leaves will die and fall on the ground. They form the leaf litter. Even they will store carbon, and this is what you see on the ground. Below, there's a lot more action happening. You have roots, even they have stored carbon. So this whole ecosystem, this whole forest is doing such a great job for us. It's storing carbon for years and for years. And that is the reason you will always hear people saying we should plant more trees, we should plant more trees. Apart from the oxygen angle, this is one more reason, because when you plant more and more trees, you are trapping the carbon. You're making sure this carbon is not available to heat up your environment. So that is why we also as an activity do two things. Whatever forest we have, we conserve it. This forest should remain just like that so that it can do the purposes that I have discussed right now. Second, wherever we have land, empty lands, where you think a forest can grow, we plant trees. Now, I would like to give you one analogy. You have seen, like, you all are young kids. So what happens when we are 8 years old, we are 10 years, we grow up very fast, right? Our height increases a lot. We eat a lot of food. We are very active. Same is the case with the trees. These young trees, they'll take up a lot of carbon. They'll take a lot of CO2 and they'll grow fast and fast. And the more and more they grow, the more and more carbon they take inside them. And they ultimately become like this, like adults. Now these are not growing, but they're still storing a lot of carbon. So that is the reason, one more scientific reason why we should plant trees. So this on the left is a kind of a plantation. These are just 1 year old trees. And on the right is a bamboo plantation. Again, which tree to plant in which area, that again is a very scientific process, because you can't grow any tree anywhere. Every tree has an area where it will grow. So this is one more reason we should conserve forest and we should plant more and more trees and in general forest. Now,
okay, so Agri, we just have a few questions before we go.
Sure.
I think one of the questions was about lakes. The question was from Ishwar. He asks, why doesn't water in sea or lakes evaporate?
Actually, the water in the lake is every day evaporating, but it's also replenished. It's a water cycle. Like I mentioned this, right? This. So this whole water, it's underground, it's coming in the lake, and now there's sun shining on it. So it's going evaporate. The same water goes up, it cools down, it becomes rainfall, it again falls on the land, it again goes inside the ground, it again reaches the sea. So whatever water is evaporating, you're very right, water is evaporating at a constant rate. The same amount of water is somehow coming back to the sea. That is a cycle. And that is what is the beauty of nature. We have to make sure the cycle is like this, because it's around this cycle our life also revolves. What we do, when this water is going in the lake, we also take some water from it and some will consume it. So this cycle it's a cycle. So yes, definitely it's evaporating, but it's also getting replenished through the rainfall.
Okay, one more question was about the plants. So at night, do plants take in oxygen instead of carbon dioxide?
They don't exactly do that, but what happened, plants are doing two processes. Like what we do respiration. We take oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. Plants, unlike us, they have two processes. They have one, photosynthesis, where they take CO2 and they exhale O2. Secondly, even they do respiration like us, which is just like us only. So in the night, what is happening? The food making thing doesn't happen in the night. So night only respiration happens, because we also breathe in the night. Now we won't stop breathing in the night. Same with the plants. So in the night, the CO2 thing is not happening, but the respiration is happening. So in the night, they're just like us. They take oxygen and they exhale CO2. In the day, they have an additional process where they take CO2 and exhale oxygen.
So it is just like us, like most of us eat during the day. We get our nutrition during the day, but we still continue breathing irrespective of day or time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that's it for questions for now. We can move ahead and then we'll come back.
So now we'll go to the another thing. Like till now we were talking about trees. forest. Now let's talk about wildlife, because wildlife I think is more interesting because it's dynamic. So now I don't know how many of you have heard about it, but the government, it spends a lot of money in the name of tiger conservation. Now anybody can ask this, that why only tiger? We have so many animals, like we have elephants, we have bears, we have deer. Why should we only focus on elephant, sorry, on tiger? So again, there's a scientific reason to it, and now I'll convince you how when you focus on tiger, you make sure that everybody's taken care of. And again, it comes from the fact which we started as a concept of food chain, food web. So yeah, so this is a tiger. So as I told you at the earlier, the food chain, food web. What was that? Tiger was sitting at the top, right? Tiger is eating deer, and the deer is was feeding on the grass. Then don't you think it's logical to say that if tiger is there, if you go to a forest and if you see tiger, it automatically means that there must be deer there. Otherwise, tiger won't survive, right? And if there is a deer there, it automatically means that there are good plants, good grasses, good trees over there. So that is why, as a management, we focus on tiger, because it sits on the top of the food chain. It is the boss. It is like the apex. So if you take care of tiger, or if you make sure that your tiger is able to survive in the forest, it automatically means that if you go into that forest, you'll find other animals also. So see, tiger here preys upon spotted deer, sambar, gaur, etc. These are all the herbivores. They all are found in India. So which means tiger, if you see tiger in a forest, which means these animals are also there, then only tiger is surviving. And now these animals are surviving on what? They eat grasses, they eat trees, which means it's a good forest. So again, by conserving tiger, what I was telling you, that our job is to make sure that the food web, food chains are maintained in the nature. The whole balance of life is maintained. So again, if you take care of tiger, you take care of everyone beneath it, because it's at the apex, sitting at the top. And one more thing. Now these animals, leopard, sloth, bear, they are not directly linked to tiger. Tiger will not eat them, and even they don't do anything. They don't have any interaction, much of an interaction. But because you conserve tiger, you conserve deer, you conserve the forest, even these guys get some space to live. So indirectly, when you focus on tiger, you're conserving the whole food chain, food web of the tiger. Apart from that, you are conserving these animals also, because these animals are not interacting with tiger, but they do interact with the herbivores. If the herbivores are good, they'll come and eat herbivores, and even they'll survive. So which is also, I've seen that when you conserve tiger, other animals that share the space with tiger, like sloth, bear, leopards, wild dogs, jungle cats, even they are conserved. And this has been proven recently. But we have been doing Project Tiger from 1973, and from like very few numbers, we have reached up to 3,000 tiger in the country. And recently, a document was released which also proved that in the area where you have tigers, you also have survival of these animals. So again, we use the concept of food chain, food web, ecosystem. That's how, in actual practical sense, to make sure that our forest have good amount of wildlife, the way it should be. Again, I would like to see one more application. Tell me one thing. We all have our favorite food, right? Like a lot of us might not be liking bitter gourd, but we love cauliflower, right? Same is the case with wildlife. Deer, sambar, these gaur who eat grasses, who eat trees, they don't eat anything. They also have their choices, that I want to eat this type of grass. But often what happen in the forest, you will see certain grasses which are growing a lot, but they are of no use to anyone. Nobody eats them. But they are making sure that when these grasses are growing, the good grasses are not able to come because of competition. So here what we do, this is a very famous weed, lantana. Lantana is a grass that grows in the Indian forest, which is of no use. It has come from outside, and it has become like a pest in our forest. So what does it lantana does? Because of lantana, it takes a lot of space. So because the good grasses which our animals enjoy, they are not able to grow. So here again, we need to use science to intervene. So what type of intervention we do? This is the heap of lantana. We have uprooted it and burnt it. You see a heap behind also. Now, once you do that, this space is empty now. So now you bring seeds of the grasses that your animals enjoy and you plant it there. Slowly, slowly, what will happen? Those grasses will start growing. Now, when you see the grasses, like suppose when you see something cooking, you go to the kitchen and taste it, right? Similarly, when these grasses will come up, the animals will sense, oh, there is this my favorite grass is growing there. So they'll start coming back. So deers will come back, the gaur will come back, and then what will happen? When the deer will eat grass, their number will increase. Tiger will come back. So this area, which was not having any wildlife, will now start supporting wildlife just by making sure that the food chain, food web concept that I told you at the start is somehow restored. So this is again one type of work that we do a lot in wildlife areas.
So there was one more question, Agrim, from
Sure,
Kavish.
sure.
His question is, if there are more predators and they eat the prey, so then won't there be less prey now?
That's a very good question, but the nature is designed such that the number of prey is always more than, for example, a deer. Whenever deer will give birth, it will give birth to 8 to 9 fawns, but a tiger will only give birth to two or three cubs. So that gap is always maintained. That's how the nature works. And you'll always see in a forest that suppose for like thousands of deers, there'll be one or two tiger. So that's a very good question. So even and one more thing, a tiger is eating only one deer per week. And we have lots of, so the reproduction is such that a deer, whenever it reproduces, it gives birth to 7, 8 young ones. But a tiger, only one or two. So the more at the top you sit on the food chain, the less you reproduce in terms of number. Then only this whole balance is restored. And one more thing, tiger, it gives an impression that tiger is eating a lot of deer, but more or less 1 week they eat one deer. That is the rate. That is enough for them to survive for a week. So coming to second now, also in wildlife conservation, there is a role of behavioral science. But tell me one thing, when you go from your home to school, you must be having a fixed route, right? Which depends on whether how many of you are walking, your friend is coming from that side, or maybe there's a good ice cream shop over there. So you go to a designated route and you are used to it. Similarly, animals, when they travel from one forest to another, they use designated routes, which they have been using since long back. Their parents were using it, they taught their kids, and now the animals are using it. So we as manager should have this information, because when we know about their routes, we can better manage them. And how thing is done, I'll show you these two examples. Now you also agree that we need roads. We need roads to reach from one place to another, to go and meet our relatives, to go and meet our friends. Often sometimes it happens that the road has to pass through the forest area because there is no other option. So in that case, what the road will do, it will break the forest, right? If a road passes through your society, your building will be on this side and your friend building will be on the other side. Now you can't go and meet your friends so frequently. Same thing with the animal. Half of the forest is this side, half is this side. So if I'm a tiger living this side, my friend is taking that side. So I can't cross the road always because there'll be traffic and all. So here what we do, we come to a compromise. And in that compromise, we use the behavioral science. For example, if you see, this is National Highway 44 passing through again Painch Tiger Reserve. On the right also you have forest, on the left also you have forest. Now this, what we have done, we have made it like a flyover. We have elevated the road so that the animals can pass from below, because this is their route. We know through scientific studies. Because if you put camera in the night, you'll see animals walking through it. Tigers, leopards, sloth bear. So when we make a road, we put that knowledge of science of their behavior into it. So now it's kind of a compromise. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a win-win. It takes care of both the parties. And this has been proven that it has been used by the animals. So the same thing happens in the cities also. Now, for example, when there's a traffic, the municipal will decide to make a flyover so that the kids can go from below and the big traffic can go from the flyover. Same is the case here also. On the right, now again, when it comes to behavior, certain animals, like here I'll give the example of giant squirrel. Giant squirrel lives on the tree. They never come down and they jump from one tree to another. That is how their life is and that is how their behavior is. So if again a road passes through a forest, this will break now because they can't jump from the road. The distance increases. Again, what happens that a squirrel is here and the relatives of the squirrel is on the other side. They can't go. So here also you need to do some scientific innovation. So what we do, this has been done in Kerala. You make a bridge. This is the canopy bridge, which connects the two forests. So now you can see animal is using it. So again, you have a road, you take care of the road, whatever needs, and you also make sure that the wildlife is not drastically affected. So again, here also you use the scientific, you should know their biology. You should know how their species behave. So that scientific knowledge you apply in management and you make sure you come to a compromise. Again, I'm not saying it's a perfect solution. The perfect solution would have been that no road should have gone. But often in management, you cannot reach the perfect solution. So you come for a compromise. So again, here again, I wanted to stress how you use the behavior science in wildlife conservation.
So Sahana has one question about the bridge and the roads built. Her question is, won't tigers be afraid of cars or noises that pass through the road?
That's a very valid question, and that again happens. So what we do, one more thing. On this highway, I don't have the picture, but we have made the sound barriers. So we have this kind of a laminated track from wherever you know the tiger is staying. So again, it doesn't eliminate the sound, but it drastically reduces it. And next question is about light also. So again, light is again, it's not completely gone, but some extent it's gone. So that remains. Again, it's not perfect, but we do certain take measures to make sure the sound doesn't come out.
That's very innovative. Yes.
So next, now this again final topic. So the topics that I've chosen here are such that like I want when you all grow up, these things always remain with you because these are the pressing issues of the 21st century, which you all need to work upon. So now finally, I would like to come on the mangrove forest. Now, what is a mangrove forest? We have been discussing different type of forest. I've shown you a lot of pictures. Now, mangrove is a different type of forest. So, have you seen a mango tree growing in a sea? It doesn't grow. Normal trees, they don't grow in sea. Why? Because sea has too much of salt water. Sea is salty, right? Even we can't drink that water. Similarly, even trees can't drink that water. But that is the beauty of nature. We have certain trees, certain specialized trees that grow in the salt water. These trees are called mangrove trees, mangroves. And that type of forest made up of that trees is a mangrove forest. If you see, they have a very special structure. See this, how their roots look like. So mangrove trees are trees that are salt loving. They love salt. I don't mind. I can happily grow in the salt water. So they grow in the coastal areas. If you go to Mumbai, you will see the Thane Creek, Virar Vasai Creek. These all are areas of Mumbai which are adjacent to sea. There you see these type of trees. Sundarban is a very good example. With the Godavari Delta in Andhra Pradesh, and then even in Tamil Nadu, you have this type of tree on the coast. Now, in our current scenario, these trees have become, and the conservation of these forests has become very, very, very crucial. Again, here also there can be 100 reasons to conserve this, but I would like to stress the most important. So now see this whole, this is again a picture from Bombay. On the right, you have sea. And this is a whole patch of mangrove forest. And you can see at the back, there's a buildings. Now, what is the function of these forests over here and why we should conserve it? You know about tsunami, you know about cyclones, you know about waves. So what do we do? What does a speed breaker does? You go on a road, you're happily driving, and suddenly there's a speed breaker. You feel that you have to reduce your speed now, and then speed breaker you cross it, and then again increase the speed. These are just like a speed breakers. So whenever you have cyclones, you have tsunami, you have waves. The waves they come at a very huge speed. But this buffer, if there's a building directly over here, the wave will come and crash it. Your entire this society will drown, a lot of loss of life and property. But when you have a buffer like this of mangrove specialized forest, because only these type of trees can grow in this salty area, these act like a speed breaker. It will reduce the speed of your incoming water. So that is their role, and that is how it protects your human habitations. Now in India, you have these type of forests in the coast of Gujarat, coast of Maharashtra, Ratnagiri, Sindhudurg, in Karnataka, in all the coastal areas. And if you see one more thing, most of our big cities, not only of the India, of the whole world, they are located on the coast. You have Mumbai, you have Chennai, you have Kolkata. These all are very big cities. You have Kochi. These cities are on the coast. So and these cities have so many people, they have so many businesses, so many government offices. You can't simply afford that a tsunami will come and just crash the whole city because it will affect so much of all of us. We have invested so much of money. We have bought our houses over there through our hard-earned money. So in that context, these forests, a layer of these forests is what we need to act as a buffer. It it will make sure this water gush, when the water comes, it will try to stop it, it will reduce it, it will reduce the damage. Now we already have such forests growing because they naturally grow in the saltwater area. If you go to the Thane Creek area, you will see this lot of forest, Vasai, Dahisar, all this area of Mumbai. So these need to be conserved, and this is the reason behind it. Because it acts like a, again, this the sponge thing I told you. There the sponge forest was acting sponge, was giving us water. Here they're acting as a sponge and protecting us from natural disasters. So the same forest again acting sponge, but serving two different purposes. And this has become very, very important because I'm sure you guys have realized that how the frequency of tsunamis, of floods have increased. So in that context, we need such type of forests, and that is why we need to conserve them also. And the reason I chose this topic specifically is because this is our growing, this is the growing concern of 21st century. And because you all are young minds, you all will be in the leadership position in the future. I want this to be hammered today in your mind that we have to conserve these type of ecosystems. So yeah, with this, I would like to end. This is a very happy lion from Gir National Park. I hope you didn't yawn like this lion, and it was interesting for you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Agrim. So we have time, everybody, for a few questions. So please type them in. While everybody is typing in their questions, I'll just read out a question from Isha. I think, let me just, yeah. So her question was regarding the weed plant that you showed us. And she asked, isn't there anything that can naturally kill these plants?
Yes. So naturally, what can kill these plants is another plant growing as a competitive. But here, what has happened with the, see, just the way we compete everywhere, we compete for sports, we compete for our marks, whatever. Even in the nature, everyone is competing. So Isha is very right. In this ground, 10 different types of grasses are trying to come up. They want to reach the sun the first. But only one type of wins. Who wins depend on a lot of factors. Now, in this case of lantana, what has happened somehow due to the way this plant is able to defeat all the other grasses. And that's why we have lots of forest area, especially in Karnataka, Bandipur, Nagarhole Tiger Reserve, full of this grass, lantana. And it has actually become a huge menace for us managers. So that is why here, what Isha is saying is very true. Naturally, that is how it should have happened. Naturally, another plant should have come and defeated it. But somehow it is not happening in this case. That is why we have to intervene. So what we do, we uproot it, we burnt it, and then also it's so risky. In 2-3 months, it will grow again. So in that 2-3 months, that the other plants, they get a window to get established, because once they get established, then even they can defeat. Then what Isha is saying will work out. But you have to give this initial push, which we do by uprooting and burning it.
Yes, and I think that really shows that intervention is needed only, like intervention should be done only when it's needed. Exactly. If there are natural ways that it can work out, then they will work out.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have another question from Sahana.
Yeah.
So you can go ahead and then I'll ask.
No, please go with the question.
So her question is, if, like, I guess she means in the context of if there is no replenishment in lakes or ponds, how long does it take, like for a pond or lake to completely evaporate?
It can take up to like 40-50 years. I would like to here give a case of Aral Sea. You can Google Aral Sea, is located in Central Asia. So Aral Sea is, I think, in Kazakhstan, that I'm not sure about the exact country, but it was a very big water body for a lot of countries, and it has a lot of inlets. Every lake has inlet. Water comes from somewhere, and there's an outlet also. So in Aral Sea, there were a lot of streams that were coming and giving their water, and this stream were coming from mountains, bringing the fresh water and all, and rainfall. Now, what happened? A lot of industrial development happened around Aral Sea. Somehow, when you do industrial development, you'll see in cities also in Pune, Mumbai, that we end up choking a lot of nalas, a lot of garbage is there. So same thing happened at Aral Sea, and in 50-60 years, you can see. I would encourage Sana to go and Google it. You will see the exact pictures of satellite and how the lake is shrinking. And then now currently it's completely shrunk, like become very, very small in this 50-60 years. So it depends how much you have blocked the inlets. That is why if you see these days, we stress a lot on when you talk about management in Bangalore, in Mumbai and all, we talk about that declogging the nalas and all, because these nalas are the inlets to a lot of lakes. Like Bangalore is called a city of lakes. So these lakes, all of them have inlets. some natural stream is coming. If you go and make a house over there, if you do construction over there, you're blocking the stream. You won't see the effect in 1 or 2 years, but in 10 years, 15 years, you start seeing that the water is going down. It is actually happening in a lot of places.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Kavish's question was again about the weed. So he says, I've heard that Latana's underground root network is so big that it takes a lot of time to remove fully. Is this true?
That's an excellent point. I'm very glad that he knows so much about it. So this is the problem with lantana. When you cut lantana, we become very happy, oh, we have uprooted it, but the root stays, and they are just again they'll come out. That's why, as even Snail you also mentioned, because when you uprooting it costs us money. That's why you only do it when it's needed, and that is why I said it has become a huge problem because this weed grows so fast, and it has actually become a management issue. And now we have to. This is just this is called CR Babu technique. It was invented by a professor from Delhi University. So we use that. But now we should also have to come up with other type of solution because as Kavish has pointed out, it's actually very true. It still stays below the ground. That's why what we do, we uproot it from the root and then we reverse it. So the root, when it exposed to the sun, the root dies. And then the chances of it coming again is less.
Wow, okay. One more question from Kavish. He asks, can we do rainwater harvesting in forests?
Yes, see all these examples that I've shown you, the generic term is rainwater harvesting for these things. I went a bit specific because I wanted to stress this sponge point, but this is a structure. Ultimately, this is rainwater harvesting. This is also structure, and there are many more. And in fact, we should do that in forests because, as I'm telling you, in cities we have not left enough space. So we have to compensate somewhere, right? In cities, most of the space has been gone to buildings, to the cement structure, and these places cannot absorb water. So you have to compensate that by doing it on the forest. So yes, we do a lot of things. In fact, this Tulsi lake, we have a lake called Bhatsa Dam in Thane district. Again, that dam also supplies water to Mumbai, and again it is surrounded by forest everywhere. So there, the forest department gets money from the municipal corporation of Mumbai (BMC) to do these type of water harvesting work because everybody knows that water is coming from the forest, and if we conserve the forest, Mumbai gets its water. So very valid point. We should do it, and in fact we do it.
Okay, one more question about tiger conservation. So you talked to us about how, in general, conserving tigers helps conserve other species of wildlife as well. But how does saving tigers help in conserving forests?
Yes. See, it's like a indirect thing. For example, when you save tiger, now tiger is a territorial animal. Like we all have this, this is my area, this is his area. Same thing with tiger, and tiger are very ferocious about it. They will fight with each other for their area. So tiger, they require a patch of forest. Sometimes it could be 10 square kilometers, sometimes it could be 100 square kilometers. And they defend it very well. Tiger will every night he will roam around in his area marking his territory. And if another tiger comes, they'll fight. So naturally, if you have more tigers, everybody wants their own piece of territory. So they'll go in, they'll capture more and more forest. And once you have forest, even we as managers will start preserving that forest. So that is how it happened. This is one way. Other way is what I told you through the food chain. Tiger will survive when there are deer. Deer will survive when there is forest. And I'll add to it. Now this comes very well with elephant. Similarly, when we have Project Tiger, we also have Project Elephant. And there the reason why we conserve elephant is because elephants are called forest engineers. What does elephant do? Elephant is a mighty animal, but it's a vegetarian. It eats fruits, it eats grasses. It takes everything and it walks a lot. And it through its fecal material, a lot of seeds come out. These seeds germinates and they become trees. So that's why elephant is called a forest engineer. So that's why when you conserve forest, when you conserve elephant, you're definitely conserving forest because that is what their job. They do that. They travel long distance and they eat fruits. That seeds come out and they become new trees.
All right. Okay. I think that was okay. There's one more question. Again from Kavish. His question is, is there like any data on how much % of water we end up getting from rainwater harvesting?
So this field has just now caught up. Like it's only in the last 5-10 years that we have started linking water with forest. So this data is still coming up. So currently, I'm not aware of any specific data, but yes, this one study was done where they kind of they brought it to numbers that how much percentage of water of the city is coming through a forest. So it's very elaborate. What you have to do, for example, you take a patch of forest and you find out all the number of streams there, and then you calculate how much water flows through that stream outside the forest. That will be one calculation. Other calculation will be of the rainfall, and then you try to match. So it's like very technical and it requires. But there are a lot of people that, especially in IIT Delhi, IIT Bombay, a lot of groups that do research of this type.
All right. Okay. And we have one more question from Isha about the water cycle and salt content. So her question is, in the water cycle, obviously water evaporates. It goes from the sea to clouds, rain, and then comes back. But does this cause any changes in the salt levels in the oceans and lakes every time through this cycle when water evaporates?
You should see it like this, because at that instant when water is evaporating, at the same instant some water is also coming inside now. Because ultimately, where does all our river go? The river is fresh water, it goes in the sea. So it's in a dynamic equilibrium. You have evaporation, and then the fresh water comes inside. So again, the salt kind of dissolves there. So salt content more or less remain constant. But yes,
Okay.
there could be seasonal fluctuations. For example, when there is summer, during summer there is no rainfall, right? But there is still evaporation happening. So at that time, the salt concentration will increase. Immediately after, so it has been seen in the case of the Ganges River, when finally the Ganges River goes to the Bay of Bengal. At the mouth of the river, the salt water is very less because there's this influx of seawater, and as you go more and more far from the delta, the salt water increases.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Agrim. This was really, really fun. I think you answered a lot of questions and this was a really fun discussion.